What's going on, YouTube? We're back at it for another video, and today we're doing a little bit of a breakdown on the power sword itself, giving you a little bit more of those tips and tricks on how to utilize this and how easy it can be to utilize this and get the most out of it, as it's one of the more powerful weapons you can use when it comes to utilizing the Bulwark. Sadly enough, the Bulwark is the only one that can utilize it, and it can be a good bit of fun to use, as well as just being really easy. A lot of people may find this clunky. I've seen a lot of comments basically saying this felt a little bit clunky, and it can if you don't really realize how to utilize it or what the combos are for it, but once you understand just use power combo and how to utilize that, and possibly even transitioning to the speed combo for single target boss units, it can become a very powerful force and something that will probably outshine and be a whole lot less complicated than using something like the Power Fist, and be a better option than the Chainsword. But that's in my personal opinion. But the first tip to throw out there is that anytime you need to look at any type of combos that may be associated with any melee weapon, just hit the start button once you're inside of a match, and it'll give you every detail as to what combos and unique abilities your melee weapon has. So this goes for any one of the weapons, but if you need a quick refresher anytime, just hit that pause menu and look over what you have available to you with the melee weapon you have. As I know, some people possibly didn't even know that there were combos or unique abilities to some of these melee weapons, and this will give you the opening to understand a little bit more about some of your weapons that you'll be wielding. But that being said, we've got more than a few things to cover, so let's get straight into it. Starting off with the basics, we've got two different styles, which one is going to be speed style. You'll notice the weapon right now is a light blue color, slightly electric but almost translucent, and what we'll need to do in order to transition from speed style over to power style is just hold R1. And then you'll notice we've transitioned over to power style. We've got a much deeper blue glow with more electricity flowing off of that weapon, and that's how you know the difference to whether or not you're in power or speed style. Now, one of the more frustrating things that can end up making a little bit of clunkiness with this weapon is that you won't be able to start a combo with a heavy strike. You will need to either strike first and then hold R1 in order to actually commit to a heavy strike, as if you just try to initially go for a heavy strike and hold it, you'll just be transitioning to the next style. Now, besides having to strike once and then holding R1 in order to get that heavy strike out, you can also dodge forward and then hit the R1 just once, and you'll notice we have a different heavy strike out of this one as compared to the heavy strike as well. We'll be able to whirl blade with the power style, but that will be pretty simple, as you'll just be able to dodge and then just immediately after hit R1, and that'll give you a heavy strike capability. Now, you can also do a heavy strike by just sprinting forward. A lot of times this is actually the combo that I do. I just sprint forward, hit R1 to open it up, and then start attacking and get some of that damage in on some of those crowds, and it'll immediately be able to stop one of those reinforcements from being called in. Now, there's one other thing to actually talk about when it comes down to the dodging. If you dodge forward and then hold R1, you'll actually be able to transition the sword to the next style and commit to their heavy strike. So if I dodge forward again and hold R1, I'll now be in power stance, or if I do it again, we'll be heading back to speed style, and it'll commit to the heavy strike from the speed style, and then be able to just start landing strikes like that. And this can be pretty beneficial, as there's two different perks on the skill tree for the weapon itself, where if you transition to the next style, you'll either get a defensive bonus or a damage increase bonus, and sometimes opening up with something like that can end up being the power play to just give you either one of those bonuses before going into that crowd and dealing damage. Now let's talk about speed style versus power style. As far as I can understand right now, there is no difference in damage. There's just the difference in the abilities of what you're capable of utilizing the sword with when it comes down to speed and the area of effect you will be damaging with the sword based on either style. Each time that I've struck any one of the smaller units, it has taken 3 strikes with both the power style and with the speed style, so generally it's about the same damage output, but there is a difference when it comes down to what they are capable of doing and what they are going to be good at being used for. Now, when it comes to the speed style, this is generally just going to be all about speed and single target damage. A lot of times I will just use this for taking on boss units, as it's just much faster, and I'll be capable of landing these hits that'll be the light strikes that further increase my overall melee damage over time. And with this 5-piece combo, it's not bad. I sometimes use it against smaller crowds, as it can be easier to transition because it has a faster rate of hits, but that's just going to be something that can be utilized at times, but other times the power style is going to be better for dealing with large crowds. Let's transition over to the power style now. Now, power style is all going to be about the capability of basically cleaving in front of you. As you'll notice, we've got quite a cone effect going on in front of us, and this gives us the capability of not only having that cone effect, but a lot more force going behind that. It may be not something that's ending up dealing more damage, but with any one of the light strikes from the power style, we'll immediately be able to push one of those smaller units into the gun strike phase. They'll just knock over very easy, and we'll be able to gain that armor back and some of that contested health very easily by just one click of the R1, knocking them back, and then being able to just fire that trigger. And at that same time, it will be able to stagger and bully some of those elite units, making it very effective at being able to basically combine multiple elite units in front of you, gaining that stagger effect, pushing them back, and stopping them from the capability of being able to dish out damage. And what will end up happening, especially if you've got the Bulwark build that I'm rolling with, where it's all about just parrying those attacks, you'll basically be able to push them into a corner until they finally come out with that attack that you can parry, and then be able to just finish them off really quickly. But one thing to note about the power style is that if you integrate Power Rake at the very end, you'll actually be able to chain it in to have the more powerful cone of effect last two pieces of the combo. So you'll no longer need to hit it 3 times, you'll just need to hit it twice, and you'll notice we're getting that large area of effect with that cone automatically, instead of having that first weaker strike that we originally had, which this will be the original strike. We've jumped ahead of ourselves and gone into the unique ability. Sometimes that'll be capable, but we'll talk about that here in a moment. But as you'll notice, that weaker strike, and then we get those other two. But if you combine it with that Power Rake, you'll be able to just go straight in for some of those powerful cone effect damage radiuses and just have better cleaving when it comes down to the crowd. And the thing that ends up making this even more powerful is not only the fact that you're basically cleaving through and causing a lot of stagger with some of those attacks with those last two of the combo for power style, but at the end of it with Power Rake, if you do have the skill point on the sword itself that ends up buffing Power Rake to where any enemy that's hit with Power Rake ends up dealing 30% less damage for 4 seconds, and you can constantly combine that, that is going to be extremely powerful, especially if you're able to hit some of those crowds of some of those ranged units. If you're not able to continuously juggle some of those units, that can save your teammates' life, or at least save some of their health in the long run. As we all know, ranged enemies in this game can be very devastating. Now, there's one last thing to talk about, and that's going to be our unique ability, and this is something that we can do with any move that we have available, whether it's going to be in speed style or power style. And as soon as you strike once, you'll notice we come back into an animation stance, and then we'll be able to hit R1 again, and then you'll notice we'll be able to basically do a 360-degree radius attack with the sword, and then slam down for another explosive area of effect damage. And this sometimes can be pretty beneficial for just jumping into one of the crowds. Most of the time that I use this, it is going to be something along the lines of just dealing with these smaller units. I don't particularly like utilizing this if I have a bunch of elites around me, as I will be stuck in the animation with this, and it can be one of those moments where if you have some of those elite units, especially the ones with the whips or the dual-bladed when the Tyrannid, they can immediately just strike you in that moment and you won't be able to break out of that animation, and that can be extremely frustrating. But when dealing with these smaller units in larger crowds, this can be perfect for just being able to displace the entire crowd, deal some massive damage, and just cut into that crowd, and it will also blow them back into a gun strike moment, so you can gain a little bit of armor for that moment, as well as just being able to basically stun that crowd and kind of push them back. But you may want to play around with it a bit. It can be a bit tricky at first, but once you get the hang of it, it can be pretty quick to transition into this, and sometimes you may end up just accidentally doing it within certain combos, because if you just kind of do a 3-piece and the next thing you know, we've got that one moment right there where we just took a brief pause, you hit R1 again and you'll just go straight into it. A lot of times, that accidental moment when you do end up utilizing it still can be pretty beneficial, and if you do hit elite units with it, it does count as a heavy strike, so it will push them back. But if you have some just outside the edge of that blast radius of this, that's when those moments of having to have that parry moment will be pretty irritating, especially those whipped ones. They'll just shoot straight in and be able to pull you down. And that's going to be basically every bit of information I could possibly give on the power sword itself. It's pretty simple. A lot of times I just utilize the power style with this and just be able to rake through some of those crowds and utilize that stagger from it in order to kind of just bully and push through those crowds and stagger some of those elite units and keep them from dealing that damage as much as I possibly can. A lot of times the only ones that don't end up getting that much stagger from this are going to be the enemies with the whips or possibly the dual-bladed ones, but as soon as you break through their defenses, generally you can juggle them pretty easily. But a lot of times the number one that's going to end up getting staggered by this are the ranged units, the ones that have those guns. This can be really beneficial in just running into those enemies and just being able to hold them down. Otherwise, the rest of them, it'll just be one of those moments where you'll keep dishing some of that damage out, breaking their posture a little bit for a moment, and then just waiting for that next parryable opportunity. As the ones with the range damage are generally going to be the ones where you'll have to really get up into their face to get that parry opportunity as well. With that being said, hopefully you've learned something from this. Maybe you've gotten a little bit of a better understanding from the power sword itself, and maybe give it a chance a little bit later on. It can be a pretty powerful tool, but obviously it's all going to come down to what is your personal comfort when it comes down to which weapon is going to be best for you, whether it be the chainsword, the fist, or the power sword. But ultimately, a lot of people may be finding this to be a little bit more clunky, even though it ends up being just a little bit of a variation compared to the chainsword, and almost just as easy to utilize as the chainsword, whereas the power fist seems like it has some little bit more complicated combos to it. With that being said, hopefully you've enjoyed this, and if you'd like to see more content like this in the future, hit that subscribe button, as well as if you'd like to see some of this content live, hit that link down in the description, follow me over at Twitch, we'll be streaming daily, and on that note, have a good one.